evening, everyone. Today we will be talking about scientific experimentation, drug testing, and genetic models on animals, presented by myself, Parker Strong O'Brien, Sylvana Talamantis, and Seth Williams. To start off, I want to introduce our topic and give a little bit of a background regarding such. When it comes to scientific experimentation, drug testing, and genetic models on animals, the following major questions arise. What type of testing should be allowed? What type of testing is never acceptable? What types of animals should be tested on? And how does our policy balance the rights of these animals with the needs of scientific advancement, which will be addressed throughout this presentation, mainly in our policy section, and will be primarily further discussed particularly when we revisit these questions at the end.
Animal testing has helped with many medical achievements. The cow helped create the world's first vaccine. Studies on mice, dogs, and monkeys led to the polio vaccine. Drugs used to fight cancer, AIDS, Alzheimer's, hepatitis, and many other would have not been possible without primates. Animals have contributed to life-saving and life-improving breakthroughs. This has helped preservation of human life. There are laws implemented for the welfare of animals in experiments. The Animal Welfare Act is a federal law governing the care and use of laboratory animals in the United States. The Health Research Extension Act, passed in 1985, covers all vertebrates used in research, testing, and education, including the mice, rats, birds that were excluded under the Animal Welfare Act. The Public Health Service is a guide for the care and use of laboratory animals, standards for a care and housing that must be provided for animals. Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee oversees the animal programs and is composed of scientists, veterinarians, and at least one member of the general public who is not affiliated with institutions in any way. There are also the 3 R's: replacement, reduction, and refinement. Replace animals with other ways of gaining the knowledge required. Reduce the number of animals used to achieve the results. And refine the way animals are treated to minimize any impacts upon them. These are some of the considerations for animal experimentation. The cons to animal experimentation is that it does not predict real-world human reactions. This can create a lack of understanding of how chemicals behave in the body. The Humane Society International states that, as a consequence, 9 out of every 10 candidates that appear safe or effective in animal studies fail when given to humans. This can delay medical progress. Animals are used for the advancement of medical techniques and experimental research. This can be very beneficial for humans. However, animals cannot voice their feelings or pain. There can be pain, even death, inflicted on animals regarding any rights. The animal cannot verbally consent to any of the experiments being tested on them. A logical fallacy for the cons is a false analogy. For example, animal experiments are reconstructions of human experiments and not a replication. A false analogy is making a comparison between 2 subjects that have more dissimilarities than similarities. An animal cannot follow the same instructions as a human, and that is why this is a false analogy. A logical fallacy for the pros is a slippery slope. For example, there would be no scientific advancements without animals. A slippery slope is implying that one small step in the wrong direction will cause catastrophic results. There would be scientific advancements if animals were not experimented on. That is why the pros has a slippery slope.
So these arguments beg the question, how can these issues be addressed structurally and in a way that solves the problem? Or in other words, how can we implement policies that can change the way that animal practices are being carried out today? So in order to move forward with this conversation of policy, a few things need to be understood. including the differences between animal welfare and animal rights. The bottom line is that animal testing would never be considered acceptable as long as the rights of these animals are taken and valued over the scientific progression that the tests might provide. We need to understand that an animal rights perspective values all living beings' entitlement to the possession of their own existence, meaning total freedom. And from this point of view, consumption, for clothing, and experimentation are all denounced. These are practices that animal rights activists do not condone. On the other hand, animal welfare perspective really values the benefits which humans can naturally take from these animals, and similarly or contrarily, they support consumption and the use for clothing, the experimentation, and other practices, given that the animal is treated in a humane manner. Now, since there's no way to protect animal rights when experimenting on animal subjects, the main focus should be to protect animal welfare. And in order to protect animals while also benefiting from animal testing, a few things need to happen. First and foremost, when creating policies, we need to agree on the goals of testing with animals. Why do we use animal subjects in the first place? What is the end game? And is it worth the risks that we take and the harm that we may cause? That way we can achieve these goals and implement policies without hindering ourselves from the end game. Next, we could involve veterinary health professionals on a national level to approve or deny any animal testing experiments, and along with that comes thorough planning for these tests, the procedures involved, and the presentation of these procedures to a team of veterinary professionals who can approve or denounce the experiment. Now, this leads to the question, should there be laws surrounding this? Should it be legal or illegal for someone to test on an animal? The big question is it worth punishing a human being for experimenting with an animal on the basis that the animal may have been harmed throughout the experiment? Much of current literature regarding animal welfare in terms of experimenting on animal subjects mentions the 3 R's of animal research. 3 R's include replace, reduce, and refine. Replace stands for replacing the use of animals whenever possible. This means practicing on non-living subjects, even plants, possibly even humans, if it means not testing on animals, as long as you can earn consent from a human. Reduce stands for reducing the number of animals needed to a minimum. This applies to very large-sized experiments where hundreds of animals are needed, and sometimes these can have effects on animal populations. So it's extremely important that reducing the number of animals needed for a test is a major part of the planning involved. And finally, refine stands for refining tests to cause animals the least amount of distress. So our policy proposal is as follows. First, we could adopt legislation which prevents testing on animals born outside of the laboratory setting, in order to reduce the number of animals tested on from the wild and have the most minute effects on animal population. Next, we could require approval of testing procedures by a board of national animal welfare veterinarians. Obviously, this would involve creation of a new nationally recognized team of scientists which would then lead to the question of federal legality of animal testing. And so finally, we could allow harmful testing to animals only if the outcome of such testing is the salvation of human lives, especially in mass quantity. This is a matter of evaluating worth, when it is reasonable to spend resources and possibly to harm an animal in order to advance medically or scientifically in some way. If a team of veterinarians dedicated to animal welfare were established, it's likely that the approval or denial of this team could be used as a form of national law when it comes to the legality of animal testing. Now, revisiting the questions that first brought this topic to life, this topic of animal experimentation, we can answer what type of testing should be allowed. From our animal welfare perspective, tests which could lead to disease-curing, life-saving procedures or medications should almost always be allowed as long as they are humanely carried out, and this also applies to tests for cosmetics. So what type of testing should never be acceptable? From our perspective, any test that is unapproved and those which have not adapted to the 3 R's mentioned in order to protect animal welfare. What types of animals should be tested on? In our opinion, only animals raised in captivity for the purpose of experimentation should be susceptible to scientific tests. This measure would protect our naturally formed ecosystems and animal systems. These policy proposals take into consideration all points of view. They prevent abuse of experimental power over animal subjects, and we implement a systematic program which can address most of the problems regarding animal welfare during animal experimentation. Does anyone have any questions?